Hello, and thank you for listening in to CLDF Chatter. To give you a quick overview, CLDF is a national charity which supports families whose child has a liver disease. My name is Joanne Taylor, and I am the Information and Awareness Lead for CLDF. Today we will be talking about education and the difficulties faced in education by children with a liver disease and their families. Today I'm going to be joined by two special guests. The first is Gemma, who is a liver mum, and she'll be telling us about her experiences of navigating the education system with a child with a liver disease. Then we'll be talking to Kate, the Children and Families Officer for CLDF. She'll be telling us about her experiences working with families and schools and the ways in which CLDF can provide help and support. So Gemma, thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about your son Oliver and your liver journey?
Yeah, I had Oliver in 2008. My pregnancy was pretty normal, apart from towards the end where I developed quite a lot of itchiness. They did tell me when he was born that he was slightly jaundiced. They said to me that that's quite normal for, a lot of babies, and that would probably disappear in a few days. So I think it was probably about a week later when the midwife came and done the heel prick, and she said he's bled quite a lot. So she sent the blood sample away for testing at the hospital. And then within a few hours, the hospital rang me up and said, could you bring Oliver in hospital? I didn't realise that it was a start of being diagnosed, because what they actually found was that his blood wasn't clotting properly and that his liver function test was abnormal. And then they were doing different tests and they just did not know what was wrong with him. He had his biopsy when he was 4 weeks old. The consultant said that after the biopsy, they'll have a much better indication. So when the PFIC diagnosis came, I didn't cry, but I think I was shocked, relieved, just a mix of different emotions. And I just didn't know what to expect. But they said it's more than likely one day you will need a transplant.
So the diagnosis must have been a lot to take in. How were things day to day with Oliver?
He was ill a lot, so he picked things up quite easily. He used to get that ill where he'd just want to lay on the floor, and he just had no energy, and that was a big pattern for every time he got unwell. That's what he'd be like, and it'd usually take him about a good 24 hours to get out of that. And obviously this was stuff that we just had to deal with and manage. And I guess what I tried to do was just live our life normally.
So when did things start to change, and when did it come that he started to need his transplant?
When he was about 2, we did our last appointment and his results came back normal. Everything was fine. After Christmas, his skin was starting to turn greeny yellow, and he said, my tummy's hurting. So I rang the doctor, and within a few hours where they'd done blood tests, they said that they were concerned. What they gathered was it was liver failure. So things had changed dramatically. He was put on the donor register. But then that took about 3-ish months before a liver came suitable. So he was prepped and he went for his surgery. And when he came out of surgery, he looked like he'd been washed, because his skin was less yellow compared to what he was beforehand. He looked like a new baby. I think from then I gave a bit more of a breath. It was a success and everything was fine.
So how are you feeling as a mum at this point?
When this happens, you feel very detached from your child. It's really hard because you feel like you're in a medical situation. You feel a little bit, not like they're not yours, but you feel like everything's so controlled, so medical, that you lose a lot of control. You can't take back that nurturing that comes from being a parent.
So how was Oliver immediately after the transplant?
So he got tired a little bit. That was one of the only issues, really, that with his legs, he just was tired of walking. I mean, it did take a little while for him to come out of the just being transplanted. But I know that he's doing really well and he's healthy and we've not had no issues with the transplant. I know that's what he needed to obviously overcome everything.
So, we're going to talk a bit today about your experiences of education and Oliver going through school. And I know also that it's a topic that's really close to your heart because you've done a dissertation on the topic as well. And the title of your dissertation is PFIC, A Parental Perspective on Living with Childhood Liver Disease and the Impact on Education. So I'm sure you've learned lots in your research as well that will be really useful for other parents and families. So when it came to thinking about school, was it that really difficult to suddenly send him to school and have someone else look after him for the day? Was that a tricky one? Were you nervous?
Yeah, at the time they had two intakes. They had the September intake and the January intake. And I didn't want him to lose out. I didn't want to miss out. I wanted him to be normal and experience all the normal things.
So what was your first contact like with nursery or school?
The teacher came to our house to see us and just to ask some questions, just see how he was. And we just agreed that he would start as normal in September. And he really enjoyed school when he was younger. The early days when he first went was after his transplant. So I guess I felt he was ready and I didn't want to take that away from him because I felt like he needed that normality and the social aspect of school. And I wanted him to have fun and experience school. I was happy for him to do that. There was really no concerns in the early days. The only issue was that he broke his arm when he was at school. But they did tell me after his transplant that he could be susceptible to bone breaks.
So did the school have to put anything else in place? Did they have to make any special provisions for Oliver?
Yeah, at the start, they ask you to fill in the information about cans and can'ts and what he can eat and what he can't eat. It was mainly focused around his diet, really, because post-transplant, there was things that he couldn't have to eat, and they asked me just about those things. And things like cooked foods as well. So no undercooked meats, no raw eggs, washing all fruit and vegetables, no like raw seafood. There was things that sometimes they weren't sure of. So he missed out on certain things because they weren't confident in themselves to make sure that he was kept safe. So, for example, he was supposed to take part in some cookery class and he was cutting vegetables up. They weren't sure if he could have had tomato. I never said that he couldn't, or I think presumed that he couldn't take part. So sometimes he'd miss out on little things like that. And I think that's when it comes to having the right staff who are trained and they understand. And if they don't contact parents, I think it's good to have clarity and understanding from parents and carers so kids don't lose out. And also about washing hands and stuff and just being a little bit more cautious with hygiene, the kissing, the sort of contact that they have, because obviously at that age they're very touchy-feely and they kiss and they cuddle. So it was being made aware that, there's no kissing and there's no cuddling and you have to keep your hands to yourself. So we have to have kind hands. So those were the words that you use. You have to have kind hands, but keep your kind hands to yourself because of the viruses, like the herpes virus. So that was the main concern. But it was mainly just common sense, really. And because of how our system is, if something happens, somebody's to blame. So I think rather than people being logical and knowledgeable about something, they shy away from that. So really, people need the adequate training.
And is there anything else that you think in particular could have been improved?
I guess what they could do better is when children have got absences, they don't really tend to deal with this very good. I think they have got a little bit better considering pandemic and what's happened with that. But actually, what happens now is that schools are quite focused on having the right numbers for children in terms of they're off for a lengthy time. Then they want to get other people involved, education welfare officers. They send letters home, maybe make phone calls to parents and carers. And all the time, that is not great practice of schools because they just don't, almost shows that they don't really care. They don't have that empathy. So really having a good relationship with parents and carers is paramount. Parents and carers don't want children to have time out of school. It's because they have to. It was something that we used to really get to me a lot because it made me feel like I wasn't inadequate as a parent. Why is my son having so many times out of school? But obviously it was for a reason.
So, do you think it got easier as time went on, as you went through infants and juniors? Did it get easier or did more issues come up?
The issues came up really for Oliver when he went into key stage 2, and that was primarily linked to issues with development. I think he really struggled with school in general. And I think that when he was in year 2, especially, he really couldn't. I think he really struggled from then. And I think it was because more was required of him. And I think really we started to realise that he was struggling. But it was all almost brushed under the carpet and we didn't really get any support. And I think he really did need the support then. And he could have had a diagnosis of whatever it could have been, because just after COVID, we went to Scott Hospital in Plymouth because they wanted to rule out really if he had autism or ADHD or something, because he couldn't concentrate very well. There was issues with him doing any sort of academic work. He's quite happy to sit and draw and do creative things, but anything for like maths and English, he'd really, really struggle. I mean, I question it a lot of the times when he'd had like parents' evening, but I know that he was given easier spellings. And then after the pandemic, I kept questioning in terms of his academic ability and just wanted some support for him. Then we had a referral and they are looking into the possibility that it might be autistic or might have ADHD. He really struggles with his concentration sometimes, and they just want to rule that out. But when I've done my research, there is links between children who have had significant health conditions, such as liver transplants, that they have, in the future, developmental delays.
That's really interesting because I know there's a lot of research out there about children who have maybe had a transplant or who have a chronic condition and how that impacts on their education if they need to miss a lot of school. But in your research, you're also talking about how having a liver condition can have an impact on a child's growth and development, perhaps when they don't get nutrition at certain points in their life, and how that can have an impact on their development, developmental delays, and then education.
I think long-term effects on children who have had or are born with conditions like liver disease, have implications on children's development. And for Oliver, I think that links with him quite well because one of the educational theorists look at significant change over the ages of 5 to 7. And that's key stage 2. And that's when I started to know changes with Oliver. Your body's not getting the nutrients that it needs to develop properly and to be healthy. That probably needs to be looked into on a longer scale, really, especially for children who are a bit older, then going into adulthood to see how it affects them through life.
And I suppose every child is different and it will depend on the types of treatments that they've had and at what point in their life they've had the different treatments.
Yeah. And then there was another question about long-term uses of immunosuppressants and steroids and how that would affect someone developmentally.
And this may come back to the fact that liver disease can be a hidden illness and the long-term impacts on children may be unnoticed or may not be studied enough. So it's really important to think about some of the effects that liver disease and living with a liver condition may have and what support can be made available for children as they go through the education system and into adulthood. So coming back to your own experience, how have things been for Oliver as he's gone through to junior school and to high school? Were things very different when he went to secondary school?
The difference I felt going into secondary school was that secondary schools were just a little bit more empathetic. They did understand more when Oliver had to have time off school. They were really good at listening to me as a parent and understanding that Oliver needed to take time out of school. There was never any asking for letters or evidence, but there was in primary school.
Were there any extra things put in place at high school that were particularly useful?
Oliver was provided with a toilet pass as well. So that's another good thing about secondary schools. He was able to leave the class to go to the toilet with a pass and not be given any sort of warning because of that. I thought that was quite good.
And how is Oliver doing now?
Now he's in year 10. Oliver's in a bit of a limbo. So, he's took his options. He's ticking along in school. He's not in the best set. Some of his sets are in the lower end, and he's still having really big struggles with his maths, especially. And I don't want that to hinder him, because the way that we work as a country is quite focused on children coming out with certain grades. They don't consider children like Oliver and other children who've had significant health needs. Actually, a lot of money needs to be pumped into the system where education and health meets. And sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect. He needs like a diagnosis, first of all. And then if not, some support, because actually he's going to be going into A levels and university and want to get a job. And, as a parent, you just want the best for your children, because not every child will want to leave school or can leave school with said grades or said qualifications. And what can they put in place to help children? There was a bit of research that I found about children who are now in their 20s who've got PFIC and how they compare to the national average in the UK. And all of them are all slightly below average. So I guess it's looking at holistically the whole child. There's a lot of different areas and a lot to still look into.
So what do you think schools could do better to support children with liver disease or with other chronic conditions?
That's when really sometimes schools can look at the care plans a little bit better and review them a little bit better, and actually get parents more involved. And then if they've looked at something and think, oh, I'm not really sure about this, instead of saying, oh, actually, I'm not going to let X child take part in this because I think they might not be able to, then they can go back to the care plan and say, actually, can they do this or can't they? And if there's a question, then they can always ring somebody up and find out if they can or not. So I think just giving the right tools and the right information, and then the links between health and care.
Is there anything else that you think it's important for schools to look at?
Mental health as well, that was a big thing, because that wasn't really discussed. And I think mental health and mental health awareness has become really quite a big thing over the last few years, especially like from the pandemic, but actually in general. Sometimes schools do have mental health workers and support workers in school, parent liaison officers who will help children and their families. Sometimes schools also take part in Mental Health Challenge Week as well. So they have like a week dedicated to, helping children with mental health. So other parts that I wanted to briefly mention that were important aspects from school were the social continuity. So the aspect that they have when they're not in school, so they're kept in touch with their peers. So anything like a Zoom call or a Teams meeting, if they can't physically be there in person, that's really important. So the social aspect links really quite well with their mental health, especially for children who are older and they've already set up relationships. They understand that they're off and they're missing their friends and peers. So I think not bombarding a child, but giving them enough so they can, yes, have the home from home experience, but kind of experience it at a pace that's suitable for them. Maybe the Department for Education needs to come out with a new curriculum for children who have to have, a long-term off from school. Maybe they can still pass their exams, but they can be assessed in different ways. I think more teachers need to be more inclusive and teaching with inclusivity, especially to children who have got said conditions are off for a long time. I think just a phone call to parent or carer or a child to see how they are and what they can do to help. It doesn't really take much, but it shows that you care and you want to do all you can to support them. And just maybe more people who know you as a family. And I think that's one of the reasons why we stuck with going back up to Leeds, because they knew us as a family and we knew them and had that continuity. And that was really important. And I think that's important for a lot of families who are in this situation, because they want to know that they've got people that they can trust them and they can go to if they've got any issues. Having different people all the time with different faces who don't really know you or your situation is really frustrating. especially for a young adult who's going through all that trauma. So I think having that continuity is really important.
So, how have you found dealing with the school? Have they listened? Have you found it easy or have you found it tricky at times?
I think if you're an advocate for your child, you can always do your best you can do. If you're quite knowledgeable and you know your stuff, sometimes schools are a bit more willing to help and understand and to work with you. I mean, we've got a good Senko, she's lovely. And they are very understanding if you need to take time off, like I said, missing time for appointments and things.
And I think it's important to remember that some children with liver disease will miss a lot of school. And particularly if they have their transplant later, they may miss their GCSE years altogether. But I think the message there has got to be that your health does come first, and there's always other opportunities. There's chances to catch up, to retake things. And there's always different avenues for different people. Not everyone will want to do the same thing, and university isn't right for everyone.
But everyone should be given an opportunity equally to get where they want to be.
Is Oliver quite open with friends at school about what he's been through? And is it also coming to the point now where he's started to manage his condition himself a little bit?
I mean, he's got a very small group of friends. When he was younger as well, he was very sociable little boy. But now he has a small group of friends, and they know that he's had a transplant. And he is very sensible. I think as well, if you give children the right information, the right tools to make their choices and stuff, because you know that regardless of what you say, they're their own person. And now that he is 15, he will be going into like the adolescent clinic now. So that starts in October. And actually, they do a lot now where they, I guess, educate, which is really good because they just want to make sure that he knows that he's responsible. Now he's older, he just takes his medication. He knows the times he's supposed to take it. He's not like, yeah, I've had a transplant and woohoo and all this. He's very reserved with it. People are fascinated, I think, when they speak to us about it. I mean, now he's getting a bit older, it's things like I want him to be safe with things, because I know that there'll be a point where, because he told me, he's like, oh, some of his friends vape and some of them smoke and some of them are allowed alcohol with their parents and stuff like that. And I said, you know, those things will happen. People will have their choices, but I think the right thing to do is to give him all the information and then for him to make his own mind up. I'd just like him to be safe and to know his limits. I want him to be happy and healthy and safe. That's all I want for him, and to live the life that he wants.
So, does he have any ideas about what he would like to do when he's older?
He wants to be an architect. So I try to encourage him to not give up and to try his best. And that's all you can really ask for your children, isn't it? You know, you just want them to do their best and just to be happy. But yeah, like I'd love it if he said, oh, actually, Mum, I'd like to go to university, and just so he can have that, because I feel like a chunk of his life has been so controlled, so medical, and he took a little while to catch up because he obviously missed out on some of his childhood for being so ill.
Thank you so much for speaking to me today, Gemma. It's been so interesting to hear about your story, about your journey through education, and we wish yourself and Oliver all the best for the future. We're now going to talk to Kate, who is a Children and Families Officer here at CLDF. She has lots of experience of working with families and with schools, so she's going to give us a bit of an insight into her role and the work that she does. Hi Kate, thank you for joining us today. Can you give us an overview of your role here at CLDF and the work that you do with families?
Hello, yes, absolutely. So I am Kate and I'm the Children and Families Officer here at CLDF. My role is to support families who have a child or a young person with liver disease. And that takes many forms. It might be something as simple as a question surrounding what benefits the family might be entitled to, a question about travel insurance, a question about school. Or it might be a much longer piece of work where intensive support is required on a one-to-one basis. So really my role is to support families with what they need at the point that they come into contact with us. And we have families who contact us at the start of their liver journey with their child, so either pre or just post-diagnosis. And we have families who come to us maybe a little bit later on in their journey when they feel that they're struggling with something, an area that we could maybe help with. So every day is completely different because every family we work with is unique. My role really is to advocate for and support families with whatever they feel they need help with regarding their child's liver disease and how they function as a family as a whole.
So today we've been talking about some of the difficulties faced by children with liver disease in education. From your experience, can starting school be a difficult time for children with liver disease?
Absolutely. So I think starting school can be difficult for all children. And when there is an added challenge like liver disease, it just can make things feel a little bit more tricky and overwhelming for the child and for their family. So what do I mean by that? Well, starting school is a big deal for any child and their family. But when you've had a child who has a chronic disease and has been very poorly, it can be really difficult to hand them over to a school, to somebody else to take care of them for 6 hours a day, sometimes longer. That's really difficult to do as a parent. So all children, I think, transitioning into school can face some challenges. They can feel anxious, it can feel overwhelming. It's a really different environment for a lot of children who maybe haven't done nursery and preschool. But when there's a liver disease as well, it can make things a bit challenging because they might have some extra care needs. They might have to miss more school than their peers due to being immunosuppressed or having to attend regular appointments or unexpected illnesses or planned or unplanned procedures. And that can make things a little bit more tricky. And I think that's part of the role I really enjoy because I think every child deserves the right to meet their educational needs, their social needs in school, and feel part of the classroom, part of the group, not different to anybody else in the class. And that's where we try and do lots of work to make sure that that child does enjoy school, is able to participate in everything, and doesn't feel in any way, shape, or form different to the other children in the class. And we've got lots of things that we do to try and help support that.
So, what would you say are some of the common problems that children might face in school at any age?
That's a really good question. And it does vary a little bit depending on ages and stages. So for younger children starting school, some of their problems may be around things to do with playing outside, where they have to take a little bit more care not to have any impact to their abdomen in many cases. They might need reminded more than other children to keep drinking water. For some children, they may need an extra snack to keep them going during the day. They may find it hard or difficult to tell a teacher if they're not feeling very well, if they're feeling fatigued or a sore tummy or feeling poorly. Some children find that really hard to do. As children get a little bit older, those things tend to feel less challenging because the child's used to it. But other problems can surface, like, for example, problems where they feel a little bit different to other children, if they're having to miss quite a lot of school for appointments or for illness, for unplanned or planned hospital admissions. That can have quite an impact on their social experience at school, with friendship groups maybe changing whilst they're not in school, missing their education, missing classes. And for a lot of the children that we support, toileting issues can present themselves and needing to go to the bathroom more frequently. And that can be a really easy fix. We've got lots of strategies in place for children when that happens. But I think it's just knowing that there is that support there, that there's a lot we can do with the school to educate them, to help them support that child. For older children, there's sometimes a degree of school refusal. So after a long stay in hospital or a long time out of school, it can feel really difficult to go back into that school environment. And for much older children, it can be quite challenging to get your child back into school at that point if they're school refusing. So that's something that we encounter fairly commonly with older children and teenagers.
Thank you so much. That is a brilliant insight, especially across the different age ranges. It's great to hear that you've worked so much with schools. Could you tell us some of your positive experiences with schools, and have there been any less positive or negative experiences?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I'm very privileged in that I get to work with schools literally around the nation. So England, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, we work with schools across all these areas. And it's probably stating the obvious, but every school really is different. And some schools are wonderful. They're very proactive. A parent might share with them our education pack, which we're going to touch on later. And then sometimes that school will proactively contact me to say, we'd like to hear from you a bit more about liver disease in children and what we as a school can do to support this child that's coming and how we can help them feel part of the school community, not in any way, shape or form different from other children, and give them all the support that we can. And that's the A star, that's brilliant. And then we can have a conversation together and everyone goes away happy. And then on the other end of the scale, we've got schools that are less proactive. They're maybe short-staffed, they're maybe struggling with their own caseload in terms of additional educational needs. And we really have to be very proactive and reactive and say, well, we need to have a meeting here with the parent if they'd like to attend, or just with me with the school to educate them and their team about liver disease. Liver disease in children can often be quite an invisible illness. So a child can look very well, but inside feel quite poorly. So to educate that staff team around what they might want to look out for, what they should be looking out for, and recognising the emotional and psychological difficulties that that child might be facing with their diagnosis. There's lots and lots of positive examples I could give around how we've supported children. It might be helpful to give one younger age group example and one from an older age group. So for younger children, we supported a child who's just starting at school to make sure that the SENCO, the Special Educational Needs Coordinator in the school, is aware of her educational healthcare plan, her needs, anything that's changed over the summer, and working with her class teacher and their teaching assistant to make sure that the whole class is aware of some special additional needs within the class, not specifically to do with this child so that she doesn't feel singled out, but they should all be mindful about not doing too much tight squeezing and hugging because of her abdomen, not kissing because of the risk of cold sores, because little children are very, very affectionate towards each other, and putting in place a plan for home learning when this little girl will need to be off school for considerable periods of time during this year due to upcoming procedures with her liver. So for a different example, I worked recently with a secondary school in England with a family whose teenager had not been at school for quite some time and had missed most of the session the year previously. And we were trying to work to get that teenager back to school. And initially that felt really challenging because communications had completely broken down between the family and the school. And one of the reasons for this is that liver disease, as we know, can be quite an invisible illness. So to the school, they didn't really have a good understanding as to why that teenager was finding it hard to make it in for morning bell, make it through the day, and keep up with the workload. So we had a number of calls with the school to help educate them and raise their awareness of liver disease and some of its hidden symptoms like fatigue, which was why this teenager was finding it hard to get up in the morning and make it through the day without some regular breaks and extra pauses during their day. So we worked together to rebuild that communication and that relationship between the teenager and the school and the family in the school to raise their awareness and understanding of what that teenager needed. And we put in place the following measures, which were specific to that teenager, but is something that we do quite a lot for a lot of our young people. So a reduced timetable at start to help get them used to being back in the swing of attending school every day. Later starts to alleviate some of the fatigue felt first thing in the morning, and a named person in the school that the teenager and their parents would be able to speak to, who had a good understanding of what was going on for that teenager at that time with their liver disease, and a lot of the psychological difficulties that the teenager was facing and that a lot of our young people face and experience when they get their diagnosis. That's a very difficult journey and can take time to process the diagnosis. So again, just making them aware of those difficulties and asking them to be sensitive and mindful of them. And I suppose that would be one of our main messages, that if you do have a child who has missed a lot of school or is maybe school refusing or finding it difficult to get back to school after a prolonged period of absence, come and speak to us. We can help, we can step in, and we can set up some measures with the school that should improve making going back to school a little bit easier.
So we've talked a lot about schools today. Is there any particular advice that you would give to schools to help them better support children with liver disease?
So for a school who hasn't had a child attend with liver disease before, we're very aware that can feel a little bit overwhelming and unknown. So I'd strongly encourage the school to get in touch with me or with the team, and we can either have a one-to-one meeting before that child starts, or we can direct you to some of our resources that will give some good information and advice about how you can best support that child's individual needs in your school setting.
Super. It's great to know that there's lots of support and lots of help available for schools. Also, you mentioned before the CLDF Education Pack. Could you tell us a little bit about that, what it contains and how it can help families and schools?
Of course. So our CLDF Education Pack is a really, really useful resource. We updated it recently to make it really accessible and comprehensive for parents and all staff within a school, so teachers, SENCOs, head teaching assistants. And we've redone it so that we've got different packs for England, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, just because there's slightly different provisions in all of these different areas. And what it does in a nutshell is it tells schools and nurseries and colleges what they need to know about having a pupil or a student with liver disease, what to look out for, what they can do to best support that child and their parents. It's a nice accessible format and something that you can go back to and revisit every year when that education healthcare plan is updated. And there's always the option following receipt of that to get in touch with me if you've got any questions and want me to go over anything in more detail in the pack specific to that child.
So we've talked a lot about the work you do with nurseries and with schools. Are you also able to help young people as they get to college and university level?
Absolutely. So our young people's officer does lots of work with young people, teenagers who are getting ready to go off to college and university. So we have these packs that will still apply, but normally by the time a child is going off to college or university, they are much more independent. And our young people service works with that young person directly to help them access the right services at the university. Most universities are really good at having lots of resources and support services for anybody with a health condition. But it can be really helpful just to work with our service, with our young person's officer, to identify what that might look like for that individual, what they might need, and when they might need it. And what we always recommend is it's better to be proactive. So even if you're planning on going off to university and everything in terms of your health is really stable, it's still good to make that link with the support services at the university, let them know about your liver condition so that if things do change and your health does change or deteriorate, they already are aware of that and they can put a plan in place really quickly to help support you within that setting. So we'd always advise that you get in touch with our young person's officer who's got lots of resources and support around starting university, and also the option to meet and talk with other young people who have already started university or who are going to go to university around the same time as you, and make those links and talk about some of the difficulties and challenges and how to overcome them that you might encounter, or just to share great stories about starting university and how it all goes.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Kate. That's been a great insight into the work that you do and the ways in which you can help and support families and young people. For those that are listening in, it's great that you have joined us on CLDF Chatter. If you would like any support after listening to this podcast, please do contact us by emailing families@childliverdisease.org. Alternatively, you can call us on 0121 212 3839. We look forward to hearing from you.